Jazakallah. Alhamdulillah, we're honored to have today Dr. Abdul Naseer Saab, who will be giving our monthly Meet the Scientist seminar. Before we get started, I would like to request Dr. Nair Kokar Saab to do a brief talk.
السلام عليكم.
Well,
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن هو قانت آناء الليل ساجدا وقائما يحذر الآخرة ويرجو رحمة ربه. قل هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون؟ إنما يتذكر أولو الألباب. Surah Zumar, verses 39, chapter 39, verses 10. English translation: I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Is he who prays devoutly to God in the hours of the night, prostrating himself and standing, and fears the hereafter, and hopes for the mercy of his Lord, like him who does not do so? Say, are those who know equal to those who not know? Verily, only those endowed with understanding will take heed. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. So today we have Dr. Abdul Naseer Malmi Kakkada Saab, who will be giving the talk. Dr. Naseer is an assistant professor of physics at Augusta University in Georgia. He's a physicist who conducts research in biological physics. He heads also a research group, and he also teaches physics. His research lab aims to discover the minimum set of mechanobiological principles required to program collective cell behaviors. And so by building multi-scale computational models to control synthetic cell-to-cell signaling, cell spatial organization, collective cell migration, and tissue shape, his research lab aims to build a fundamental understanding of synthetic developmental biology and contribute to advances in disease prevention and treatment. He's authored over 12 scientific papers, one book chapter, and he's an active member of the American Physical Society and Biophysical Society. And at the Jamaat level, Dr. Abdul Naseer serves as publication secretary for the Georgia Carolina chapter, and he also has the honor of serving as Naib Sadr, which is for that interview. And today, Dr. Abdul Naseer will be giving a talk on mechanobiology, how physical factors such as forces and mechanics influence biological systems. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Abdul Naseer. Just as a reminder, we try to have about 20-25 minutes presentation, and then 10 minutes or so at the end for questions. Anyone who does have a question, they're also free to enter it into the chat, or at the end they can raise their hand and ask directly. So yeah, without further ado, Dr. Abdul Naseer.
Jazakallah, Dr. Asif Saab, for the nice introduction. I hope you can see my screen okay, right?
Ji, Jazakallah.
Okay, so Bismillahir Rahman Rahim. I'll give you an overview of my area of research uh, called mechanobiology. So it's a subfield of physics under biophysics, biological physics, where it's really at the crossroads of physics and biology. It's a topic of research that's at the interface of physics and biology. So, you know, so this aspect of interdisciplinary research at the where two different disciplines meet, it's appealing as a field to enter into and do research, but there is a lot of history behind it as well. So I'll motivate that there is more than 1,000 years of history in terms of scientific research cutting across different disciplines. And to give you an overview of that, there is a lot of contribution from early Muslim scientists as well in this type of research. So I'll give you a background of it, historical background perspective on this. And so when one talks about physics, Isaac Newton is the central figure in physics. You can his contributions go from understanding the laws of motion. So to uh, give you a bit of a background on that, physicists are really interested in describing motion. So how movement occurs, what are the different properties of movement, and that is it is across different scales. So physicists are interested in the motion of atoms within solids, within materials that we can think about, as well as the motion of planets, motion of moon, and so on, right at the scale of planetary objects. So physicists are really interested using the language of mathematics. How do we describe the various types of motion that we observe, right? And Isaac Newton is the fundamental, is the central figure who made very well, immense contribution into writing down the three basic rules, laws of motion that we call it, Newton's three laws that describe motion. So if that was enough of a contribution, he would go into the history books as the primary figure in physics. But his research contributions did not just stop there, but he contributed into understanding gravity. So for example, how gravitational forces work. If you drop something, you see it falling towards the earth, right? So how does this happen? It's due to the gravitational force of attraction that earth exerts on an object. So he was fundamental in helping understand gravitational force, and on the basis of that, how planets move in our solar system, for example. And not only that, then Newton's contribution into understanding light, that it's made up of different spectra, and then also establishing calculus and applying it to understanding nature. So given all these monumental contributions, and there's a very interesting quote that's attributed to Newton, and he's in a letter that he wrote to a fellow scientist. He said that if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulder of giants. Right. So now the question is, who are these giants that he's talking about? This is back in the 17th century, so that he came up with these. So in this famous work, Principia Mathematica, that he laid down these physical principles back in 1687. And he said at the time that whatever he saw in terms of scientific insights, that came by standing on the shoulder of giants. So who are these giants that he's talking about? So here I'd like to make the case that a Muslim scientist was one of these scientific giants that he was standing on the shoulder of. So for instance, as a case in point, if we look at Newton's first law of motion, it states that a body at rest remains at rest. So if you have an object, let's say a table or a chair, if it's at rest, it will remain at rest. Or if it is in motion, it will remain in constant motion with a constant velocity unless acted upon by a net external force. So this is Newton's, in terms of this laws of motion, this is the first law of motion that was put forward by Newton. It tells us that for any object, here we are talking about non-living objects. Typically the physicists have been thinking about non-living objects, right? If it's at rest, it will remain at rest, or if it is in motion, it will continue to move unless there is a net external force that acts on it. So what is a force? So you can think of it as a push or a pull that you exert on an object, right? So now compare this to Ibn Sina, one of the Muslim scientists from the first Islamic golden age, right? 300, 400 years before him. He developed a similar law of inertia to describe motion. He postulated that no object begins to move or comes to rest by itself. So this idea that objects cannot move by itself or come to rest by itself. So that is at the core of this Newton's first law, was already put forward by Ibn Sina during the first Islamic golden age. Of course, Newton built on this, and then he came up with the concept of force, which is very critical in terms of understanding motion. That was in there, that was missing. But I'd like, this is a nice illustration of the point that one of the giants that Newton stood on top was Ibn Sina. And or in the Western circles, he's known as Avicenna. And not only did he contribute towards understanding physical laws of motion, but he's also known for writing a book, multiple books, but one of the books called The Canon of Medicine was the most important medical reference book until the 17th century. So you can already see, so 1,000+ years ago, Muslim scientists were pursuing interdisciplinary research and contributing to many different areas. So in terms of interdisciplinary work, it's appealing in the sense that you can go across boundaries of different disciplines. But I'd also like to give an example to show that it can lead to monumental scientific discoveries, right? So if you think about modern biological sciences and the biotech industry, the pharmaceutical industry, it's underpinned by our understanding of the structure of the DNA. The idea that you have genes that make up that is important for the functioning of cells. So proteins are made from transcription of genes, right? And the structure of the basic building block of this gene is made up of DNA. And so on this side here, I'm showing a cartoon of the DNA structure that was drawn by Watson and Crick. So Watson and Crick were both honored with the Nobel Prize for their discovery of the structure of the DNA, right? So it's really a fascinating history, the process behind the discovery, contribution of many different people and multiple fields came together. The principles, ideas from many different fields come together to facilitate and allow this monumental discovery. So for example, the contribution of physics in this was Crick, one of the contributors to the discovery of the DNA structure. He was trained as a physicist, and his expertise was in using X-rays. So he would shine X-rays on materials and then look at the reflection and the refraction. So essentially what comes out from X-ray interacting with material to figure out what is the structure of the material that one is dealing with, right? So that was his background, and that was very fundamental in understanding in their ability to put together the structure of DNA. And in addition, then you need mathematics to be able to analyze what are the properties of X-ray reflection and so on. Of course, and this draws upon the field of biology. DNA is a biological material, and then chemistry as well. So you have this coming together of different fields that allowed for truly a monumental scientific discovery that is at the basis of modern pharmaceutical and biotech industries. So also this concept in molecular biology. So right now, when the statement that structure determines function, it's fairly well known and people understand it. But if you go back 70 or 80 years ago to say that structure of biological molecules like protein structure or the structure of the DNA is important to its function was not a well known concept. But then physicists were already thinking about the structure of matter, structure of solids, liquids versus gas-like matter, right? So, and then how the structure affects what you get out of these materials. So what the point I want to make is that these interdisciplinary ideas crossing traditional disciplinary boundaries allowed for such discovery to occur. So now coming back to my topic of research, my area of research of mechanobiology, it is, you can summarize it as a study of how biological systems detect generate and react to physical forces. So I'm a physicist by training, but my area of research that I think about is in biological systems, how do cells detect, generate, and react to physical forces? So I want you to think about, for example, the pushing and pulling that cells can exert on each other, and also how cells interact with their surroundings, and how do cells detect these kind of forces, and how does that impact the way they function. So in terms of this area of research, I want to point out some of the, you can say, foundational discoveries in this area that really established this field. One discovery by Engler et al., where they showed that stem cells, when it comes to stem cell differentiation, so this is in terms of when you think about embryo development, right? So initially an embryo is made up of very few number of cells, and then as a function of time, over time, the cells can grow and divide, and then the cells can specialize into particular cells, right? You'll have brain cells that come about, muscle cells that come about, and then, for example, bone cells, all the different type of cells. But initially they all come from one root cell, right? That is what it is, a stem cell, which has this ability to generate or form or transition into other cell types. That's what is stem cell. So this discovery in terms of mechanobiology was that when you take a stem cell, so that's shown in this cartoon here, and then imagine that now you put it on a surface. So this substrate is a surface, and then now one can change in the lab the stiffness of the substrate, right? By stiffness I mean the substrate, you can make it hard, like let's say like a dining table. When you press on it, it's very hard, does not, it's not by any measure soft, versus let's say like a sofa, when you press on it, it can deform, right? So this, by changing the stiffness of the substrate, what they showed was that these stem cells can become brain-like cells if it's soft substrate. The stem cells become brain and neuron-like cells. And then if the substrate is more stiff, it can become like muscle cells. And then even further stiffer substrate can lead to bone-like cells. So the stiffness, how the cell is interacting with the surrounding environment, has an ability in terms of dictating which type of cell that it can become. And then also in terms of cancer progression, so cancer, you think of it as a genetic disease. It is a lot of the contribution to cancer progression comes from genetics. But discovery recent over the last 2 decades, scientific research has shown that the mechanical environment around the cancer, around the tumor, can also have an impact on whether the tumor can progress or not. So what I'm showing in this set of pictures here, so here, for example, the mammary cells. So these are cells from that can form breast cancer, right? So these have these kind of ring-like shape. There are multiple cells here that come together to form a ring-like shape here, shown here in the lab as well on this side. Now the surrounding environment, so imagine now these cells are put into a gel, and one can change the stiffness of the gel. These gels can be soft, meaning that they can easily deform, or the gel can be very stiff. So what this group discovered is that depending on the stiffness of the surrounding environment, if the surrounding gel is really stiff, it can allow for these cells to divide and uncontrollably, and then also their spatial structure is scrambled. So they, instead of this nice ring-like shape, they kind of divide uncontrollably and take on many, really a scrambled shape. So these are like typical signatures of cancer progression. So the environment can also have an impact on how cancer can progress. And then another aspect that I work on a lot is in collective cell migration. So in this aspect, what I'm showing in this figure here is a collection of cells. So this blue here marks the nuclei of cells, and then so you have a multiple, mass of tumor cells here, and then you can see they are embedded in a gel, and you can see these kind of buds that are forming off of this mass. And so depending on the structure of the surrounding gel, you can have more of these buds that form from the tumor mass. And then, so this is what is called tumor invasion into the surrounding. And so this is really like the initial stages of how cancer can spread into different organs. So essentially, the point being that mechanical principles, mechanics and physical principles of the cells in terms of how the cells interact with one another and also their surrounding is very important determinant of how cells behave, both in terms of stem cell differentiation, with what kind of identity that a cell takes on, or in terms of cancer progression, whether cancer can progress or not, and then in terms of cells being able to move within their natural environments. So I wanted to go a little bit more into detail into cell migration. So the ability of a cell, so this is the ability of a cell to move from one point to another point. That is a fundamental feature of animal cells. And this is very important in many different for life to function, basically. For example, when it comes to immune response, right? So if you think of a cop that's patrolling in a city, right, looking for criminals or criminal activity, you can think of immune cells in our bodies as kind of doing a similar function where they are moving around through the different tissues, through bloodstream and so on, to be able to detect disease cells and then eliminate them. So cell migration is a very important aspect. So in terms of new developments, so in this area of research, new microscopy techniques have really enabled us to track the movement of thousands of cells. So let's say during the course of development of an embryo, we can track now, we have the ability to track many, many cells. And then now one can ask questions like, what are the underlying rules for how the cells move around? So in this video that I'll show you from taken from this paper, all these dots are many different cells that are being tracked. And then the colors here represent the different direction in which these cells are moving, right? So imagine, so this is for during the initial stages of a zebrafish development, where now the green color will indicate this movement towards the North Pole, and then this other direction in this other color, yellow will indicate moving along the equator and so on. So as I play this movie, you can see cells that are dividing, and then as a function of time, you can also see like really complex patterns of movement that comes about, right? So if you give it some time here, you can see this kind of pattern where along this line here, you have cells that are moving towards the North Pole, and then another group of cells that are moving in this direction, shown by these different colors here. And so this idea that during the course of development, cells have to migrate, move around, and then also localize to specific areas, so that then they form kind of the organs that need to develop later on. So, for example, in this movie here, what I'm showing is this in this many millions of cells that are all moving around. These red cells are retinal progenitor cells. So these cells will eventually form the retina in the eye. So you can see them moving together kind of collectively. This is what I mean by collective motion. They kind of coordinate their movement, and they move and localize in a specific location. And then they eventually then go on to form the retina in the eye. And then, so cell migration is also important to really be able to understand and treat cancer, because cell migration contributes to cancer metastasis. This metastasis is one of the greatest challenges in clinically managing cancer. So in this video that I'll play again, what you're seeing here is a ball of glioblastoma, a particular type of brain cancer cells. So these different speckles that you see are the nuclei of these different cells. So you can see them kind of moving around. So that's by tracking them, you can see how the cells move, and then you can also see division over time, and then how they spread about, right? So what we do in our research group is that we use computational models. So using computational coding tools with MATLAB or Python, we come up with a technique called agent-based modeling. We come up with specific rules. We predict that these are certain rules that cells will follow. So for example, in terms of how the cells will push on one another, how they will stick together. and then how the cells will grow and divide. We ascribe rules to those cell behaviors, and then we can come up with, so on the right is a computational model for tumor growth that we developed, where now these individual spheres that you see are individual cells. They can grow and divide. Given the scale, there are many thousands of cells here. So given the scale, you cannot see their growth process in detail, but they're growing and dividing. And this is a three-dimensional collection of cells in the computational model. And what you're seeing is a cross-section through the three-dimensional collection of cells, where we have also indicated the color, meaning how long these cells have lived, in blue color meaning freshly, newly divided cells, and red color indicating like longer living cells. So we can, using these kind of computational models, we can look at more in detail about what are the properties of the motion of the cells, what are the rules for the motion of the cells, to come to an understanding of what are, can we identify some basic principles for how cells move, either both in the context of tumor growth as well as during embryo development. So here some of the key results that we have obtained in the course of our work so far. We have identified that cell division, so the fact that cell division event can allow for cells to kind of rearrange their positions. We predicted that this plays a key role in the invasion of tumor cells into the surroundings, and this has a marked effect in terms of the ability of the cells to move if you think of a three-dimensional tumor mass within the core, where the cells are tightly packed, versus the periphery of the tumor. And then we've also identified that adhesion between cells, how the cells stick to one another, the strength of that adhesion can regulate the roughness of the surface, how much invasiveness you can get from the tumor surface. And then also it will affect the ability of the cells to divide. And then I talked about the stiffness. So the stiffness of the cell, how squishy is it, how stiff is it, and also this stiffness of the surrounding that the cell experiences. We have identified as crucial for the cells to be able to migrate during embryo development. And that work was featured on the cover of this journal called Nature Materials. And then this is another work where we looked at communication between different cells. This was featured on the cover of Biophysical Journal. So this is another aspect of our work where we publish in peer-reviewed journals regarding the progress that we have made. And then another aspect of our work is teaching, and then mentoring students in research. So far I've trained 8 students, undergrads, mentored a postdoc, and co-mentored a PhD student. My students have published in peer-reviewed journal, one as a first author and another as a co-author. And they also presented their research at international conferences. And then another rewarding part of being in academia is that you're able to see the career development of the trainees. So my postdoc is currently in a tenure track position. Undergrads have gone on to PhD programs and industry positions. So this is from our most recent group meeting with my trainees who are working with me. So Sean, one of my students, this summer, he got an internship sponsored by the US Department of Energy, where he'll be using the research topics that we worked on but he'll be applying it to in another context in terms of nuclear physics. He'll be working on a project in nuclear physics. So in terms of future work, another aspect of working in academia is you get to also branch off into other areas, develop new expertise. So one area that I'm really working on developing expertise is in getting started on research is in how we can use immune cells to better target cancer cells. So in this video here, what you're seeing is a T cell, immune cell in orange, attacking a cancer cell in blue. So we think that this contact between the T cell, the immune cell, and the cancer cell is very important for how the killing process occurs. So the question we are asking is, can we use these, can we engineer, can we manipulate the adhesion molecules that allows for this the adhesion between immune cells and cancer cells to better target better for immune cells to better target cancer cells. So there is a lot of intricate details involved in how T cells interact with tumor cells, immune cells interact with tumor cells, and to be able to better control that. And thinking about aspects of looking at how adhesion between cells can allow us to control spatial organization of the tissue, how the different cells, when you have many cells, how can they organize in particular manner, and then also to control how cells move around within space. This is something that we are excited to work on and uh, focus on in the future. So Jazakallah for listening. And if you're interested in this area of research or have questions, reach out to me at nasirmk@gmail.com. I'm currently at Augusta University, but this fall I'll be joining Towson University. This is in Baltimore area, where we'll be developing a biophysics major at the physics department. So you also, if you have students interested in joining us, that would be great to think about these problems and look more into these research questions. Jazak.
Jazakallah, Dr. Nasir. Mashallah, beautiful presentation, very nice. And yeah, with that, I think we'll open up to questions. If anyone has a question, please first raise their hand and then I can unmute you. But Dr. Nasir, one thing I was kind of interested in is something similar to my own research is, where you're doing a lot of, cool work on physical connections, right? Like, adhesion or mechanical forces.
Right.
Can you comment on like non-physical forces? So, like one thing I'm interested in is the brain and neural communication. And what we're starting to realize is that it's not only physical connections between neurons, it's also
Yeah.
what we call apoptic connections. So even when neurons are near to each other, there's some electric field connections, communication that happens. I guess
Yeah.
one of the disadvantages are in general kind of the limitation is technology, right? Like we can't really visualize or
Right.
see a lot of these additional forces. I don't know if you want to comment on that or if you have like any
Yeah.
thoughts on the future of
Right. Yeah. So yeah, in terms of in terms of communication between neurons, then you have electrical forces that are more important. So that you would still classify, that's another branch of physics where you go into electrical forces and how charges move and molecules get transported. But then the question of, yeah, are there, for example, more long-ranged communication? Is that what you're getting into? Like maybe without necessarily contact. So
Yeah, exactly. Or even in non-neural tissues, you mentioned cancer,
right.
other applications, embryo.
Yeah, that it's really a fascinating question. I mean, I think this is one of the big unknowns in so even in terms of physics, right? Gravitational force is a force that, for example, it you don't need direct connection. It acts over long distances, right? And that's the least understood of the force as well in terms of physical forces. So whether such forces exist in biological systems, that will be really uh, I would say it's one of the big unknowns. जी.
Jazakallah. And if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand, or you can put it into the chat as well. Um, gee, Dr. Nayarpai, if you want to ask your question.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah, Nasir Bhai. I really appreciate the fact that you added a lot of historical context to your presentation. And speaking of which, I mean, looking into the future as well and tying the future into your research, how do you think AI will play a role in the research that you're doing, especially the tumor migration studies that you're doing. If you can shed some light on that, Jazakallah.
Yeah, that's for anybody in computational research, AI is the big question. And there are many, it's a very fast moving field, many new approaches coming online by the day. And so, but primarily the way I think of it as it is a new tool for us to be able to more efficiently do research. So far, for example, in terms of the work I do, previously certain tasks that would, like let's say if I want to make a quantification, a figure for one of the research papers, the coding and going through the process would take, let's say, half a day. But now AI with tools like ChatGPT has made that process much faster, right? Answering those kind of questions are much faster. But then I still, feel that there are a lot of unknowns out there. So AI can build off of what is known. So you feed it information that's already known, and it will give a good summary of what has been known so far. And but in terms of truly unknown, like the question Asif Bhai raised, that's something that forces that are not in direct, for objects that are not in direct contact, that's something we don't know anything about. So that's something that human mind, we still have to work on it and try to understand it.
Jazakallah Nasir.
I'll say Khan if you need to ask your question.
Yes, assalamu alaikum. Nasir, very really good question. Me and my daughter are rapidly listening to it and really enjoying it. Question is with the way you talked about how kind of confining or stiffening the substrate matters to migration. Are these type of kind of techniques being extrapolated and being applied to, like, cancer mitigation, or is it experimental, or is this like highly theoretical right now? Just curious how that's going.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So, for example, the stiffness of the cell and how that the environment affects the migration, we were able to show it. So we developed a computational model to predict it, and then we are able to show it in a frog embryo in an experiment. But then, yeah, of course, from there to actually applying it to treatment, that's a big, still a long ways to go. So that's the thing with basic research, is that it will still take quite a few years before we can get into actual therapies. But I'm really hopeful that in the future, currently, if you think about the pharmaceutical industry treatment techniques, they are highly focused on genetics, biochemistry. But in the future, I'm hopeful that there will be these kind of mechanical aspects to treatment as well that will come about. And that's essentially, we are laying the groundwork. Our research is laying the groundwork for that to happen.
Abdul Naseer Bhai, there's a question in the chat. It says, can you elaborate on the cell environment and how that environment can be enhanced so that it won't contribute to the cell's further growth?
Yeah, so there are now a lot of activity in this area in terms of cell environment. So for example, when a cell is in contact with a particular surface, the properties of the surface, so how sticky the cell is to the surface, will have an impact on whether the cell will be able to divide or not. So there are many techniques to be able to change the properties of the surface, biochemistry techniques to be able to change the molecules on the surface where you place the cells, and then to be able to control how the cells can divide or not. But then, yeah, again, this relates to, for example, to applying it to tumor. That's there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. So, for example, can we change the environment of a tumor to be able to control its growth? So that's still in the works. A lot of work, a lot of research work is happening in this area, but the underlying principles are there.
So, Jazakallah. There's a question about President Biden. What is meant by cancer metastasizing to the bones.
Yeah, so that was what I was what I was talking about. Yeah, cancer metastasis is one of the primary killers. One of the primary ways that cancer kills people is that you have tumor, let's say prostate cancer, but then the cancer cells can move surround to the surrounding and then eventually can enter the bloodstream or the lymph system, lymphatic system, and then they're able to move. It's able to be transported to another organ. So it could be the bones, it could be the brain, and so on. So typically, what happens is that the primary cancer is treated, but then those cancer cells have already moved out and to other organs, and then they come back. The other then the tumor grows in other locations, and so this happens through metastasis, and so that makes essentially cancer much more difficult to control because you're not able to focus on one location, right? We have treated a location, but cancer has already spread to other locations. So, but the underlying idea behind it is the ability of the cell to move is very important during the process of metastasis. So that's why that's one of the main focus in this research area, to be able to understand what are the properties of the cell movement, how do the cells move, so that we can try to control movement. So in the case of cancer, it's bad, we want to limit it, but then for natural life processes, like I said, for our immune system to function, cell migration is important. So, there's plus and minuses.
Yeah. I have another question. Anything we can add in our diet to strong the basement membrane or their integrity to prevent?
Prevent metastasis. Yeah, that part I'm not very sure about the connection between diet and of course there is a link. Depending on the diet, it can, for example, control or limit cancer growth. But the mm, I cannot. My expertise is not in that part of it.
And then there's a question if you can give your expertise, if there's such a thing as the effect of external forces like electromagnetic waves on the cell surrounding stiffness and cell migration.
Yeah, this is a very good question, very interesting question. There's a lot of research happening in this area. Research groups have shown that, for example, electric fields, you can apply electric fields and then cells will move along the direction of the electric field. So electric field is one of the ways that you can control cell migration. And there's a lot of research happening in this area. Perhaps I know that some groups have shown that, for example, when you have wound in the skin, electric field can help close the wound faster. So those are some technologies. I think they will be applied very soon. There will be applications in
Or
terms.
drug delivery as well. I know now
Yeah,
they have like patches and you can use electric fields to have
yeah,
drugs penetrate deeper.
right. Yeah, but this is a fascinating area. There are a lot of open questions in terms of the interaction between electromagnetic fields and cells. Yeah, and then we also know, for example, if you look at nature, and now I'm talking about migration of animals, you know, organisms like whale, they can travel in really straight lines over thousands of miles. And even you know, it's very difficult for human technologies to reproduce such straight line motion. And perhaps that these animals, birds, they're able to detect the electromagnetic waves around to be able to control their migration. So a lot of open questions.
And I think we'll take one final question. Said to cancer patients to stop sugar and if that'll kill cancer cells. Is there any
Mm. That's more
science
of
being?
yeah, I think that's more of like a nutritionist. Perhaps they can answer that better, not my area of expertise, but there's also research going into sugar molecules, how that can help, for example, stickiness, how that can control stickiness between cells and the surroundings. So those are areas that people are working on to understand. So, but having said that, we need more people to come into science, and a lot of open questions, a lot of various.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jazakallah, Dr. Abdul Naseer. I really enjoyed the talk. I'm sure people here as well. And before we close, I do want to just announce our next seminar will be held on Wednesday, June 18th, 8 to 8:30 p.m. And the topic of that talk will be opioid-induced respiratory depression by Ayman Malik from PhD candidate from Rutgers University in neuroscience. So looking forward again to having everyone join that talk. And until then, Allah Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.